So picture this, right? The financial markets are bracing themselves, getting ready for this, like, tariff storm.
Yeah.
They're already reeling, from those new levies that just came out.
Right.
And it sent the Dow on this, like, historic roller coaster ride. I mean, it was plummeting hundreds of points, then surging back up, just this crazy dance. And it all ended, in a sea of red.
Oh, yeah.
And then there were these whispers, right, of a possible tariff pause,
Right.
fueled by, like, this online rumor that just popped up out of nowhere. And it was just enough to give people a little spark of hope, right?
Yeah.
But then, boom, it gets shut down, like, officially denied.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just intense uncertainty everywhere you looked.
Yeah, absolutely. And then out of the blue comes this unexpected turn.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And then the news breaks. 90-day pause on these, what they call them, these reciprocal tariffs, which are basically tariffs that one country throws back at another country in response to, well, tariffs.
Right. Tit for tat.
And this pause goes into effect immediately. Right.
Wow. And the market just explodes.
Yeah.
The Dow Jones Industrial Average, it just shoots up. We're talking gains of over 2,000 points. Some were even saying 3,000.
Wow. That's huge.
For those of you out there, keeping an eye on the markets, this was a massive recovery. Investors got their confidence back after that initial shock, right?
Absolutely.
And it wasn't just the Dow.
Yeah.
NASDAQ, S&P 500, they all followed suit, huge jumps, lots of them in the double digits percentage-wise.
Yeah.
And the tech sector, I mean, they were really taking a beating before this, right? They saw a major relief rally.
Oh, yeah, for sure. And I think what's really interesting, if we zoom out a little bit, is how this whole market reaction shows just how sensitive everything had become to, like, anything anyone said about trade.
Right.
The volatility you were talking about, it really shows how much anxiety had been building up.
Totally, yeah. But, there's this crucial distinction here. It wasn't like a pause on everything across the board.
This 90-day reprieve, with that reduced reciprocal tariff of 10%, it only applied to those countries that hadn't, hit back with tariffs of their own against the U.S.
I see.
So we're talking about roughly 75 nations.
Okay.
But, and here's the big thing, there was this one really important exception to this whole pause thing, wasn't there?
Oh, yeah, for sure. This is where you see that targeted policy approach really coming into play.
Right.
The announcement specifically left China out of this 90-day window.
Exactly.
And not only that, tariffs on goods coming from China, those were set to go up right away, straight to a whopping 125%.
125%. I mean, you got to wonder, what's the administration really aiming for here? What's the strategy?
Yeah.
Their reasoning, at least what they said, was that China just doesn't respect the global markets.
Right.
And they keep escalating those retaliatory measures. We're hearing it's up to 84% on U.S. goods now.
Wow.
And, the Treasury Secretary even called them out, straight up used the term bad actors, clearly pointing the finger at China.
Yeah. It's super interesting. You can see this very clear strategic line that they're drawing.
Yeah.
Trying to isolate China with their messaging, while at the same time offering a kind of de-escalation to those trading partners who haven't, been playing the tariff tit-for-tat game.
So for everyone out there trying to make sense of this whole thing, the big question is, why this two-pronged approach?
Right.
Was this pause, for most countries, a genuine rethink? Like, oh, wait, these initial tariffs are causing way too much pain, we got to ease up.
Yeah.
Or was this the plan all along, like a tactical step back in one area to put even more pressure somewhere else? Let's look at some of the interpretations, shall we? One big theory out there is that this was a tactical retreat, a direct response to those massive market drops we saw. Remember that record-breaking single-day swing in the Dow?
Oh, yeah.
And even some of Trump's big supporters, like Bill Ackman, were publicly saying, hey, this is like a self-inflicted economic nuclear winter. We need a timeout.
Yeah, that's a pretty serious statement.
Right. And then you've got investors pulling out of those super safe U.S. Treasury bonds. I mean, that's a classic sign that people are losing confidence in the U.S. economy.
Yeah, for sure. And that perspective really highlights how, like, when you make these big, sweeping tariff changes, there can be all these unintended negative consequences.
Exactly. It felt like the market was saying, no, you went way too far, way too fast. And maybe, just maybe, the administration listened.
Possibly.
At least a little bit. But, the administration itself is telling a different story. They're saying this was all strategic, all calculated.
Interesting.
The Treasury Secretary came out and said those first tariffs they created maximum negotiating leverage.
Okay.
And that this 90-day pause, it's just a chance, right, for those 75-plus countries that reached out to the U.S. to sit down and figure out how to get rid of their trade barriers.
That definitely sounds more like the negotiating style we've come to expect, right?
Yeah.
Apply pressure to get concessions and then offer some relief as a way to secure those concessions.
Right. But, for this to work, the other side has to be willing to play ball.
Exactly. That's the key.
And there's another thought out there that maybe those initial reciprocal tariffs, the really high ones, they just weren't going to work in the long run.
Okay.
Because they were based on trade deficits, the difference between what a country imports and exports.
Oh, I see.
And some people say that trade deficits, they're not really the best way to measure unfair trade practices.
Right.
And then you've got the whole geopolitical angle to think about.
Okay.
Is this a power play to isolate China, get all the other trading partners on board, willing to negotiate with the U.S., and then boom, that puts the squeeze on Beijing.
That's a big one. And by offering this more, let's say, friendly approach to other countries, the U.S. could be trying to build this united front, to address those specific concerns about China's trade practices.
Right, exactly. And another interesting thing that came up was the role of advisors, specifically Scott Bessent. Now he's got this background in financial markets, and he seems to have taken on a bigger role in the whole deal-making process.
I see.
And there were even some reports that he talked to the president about the markets right before this announcement dropped.
That raises the question of how much those market-informed viewpoints actually swayed the policy shift.
Right. I mean, did they have any real influence?
It does suggest that maybe the administration's approach is evolving.
Yeah.
Becoming more aware of how those trade policy decisions can have immediate and broader financial consequences.
Right. But here's the thing. Even with the market bouncing back and all this talk about strategy, there's still a ton of uncertainty in the air.
Yeah, for sure.
The analysts are saying, hold on, the coast isn't clear yet.
Right.
Those tariffs, even with the pause, are still pretty high.
And that's something crucial to remember. The newest tariffs, those on countries that didn't retaliate, those are on hold for now. But that baseline tariff of 10% for most of them, that's still there. And that could still affect consumer prices, mess with supply chains.
Totally. And let's not forget those other tariffs that were already in place, the ones on Canada, Mexico, auto parts, steel, aluminum.
Right.
Those might still be active. It's like this tangled web of trade restrictions, and this 90-day pause is just one little thread in that whole mess.
Absolutely. And it's not like this pause just magically erases everything that happened before.
Right.
Like Larry Summers said, it's a good step, but it doesn't just instantly restore credibility.
Right.
Once that trust is shaken, it's tough to get it back, especially when it comes to business and international partnerships. You need that predictability. You need to know what to expect.
So true. And then you look at what's happening internationally, and it's really telling. China, not surprisingly, didn't back down at all.
Oh, yeah.
They slapped back with their own retaliatory measures. Tariffs on U.S. goods went up to 84%, and they even added U.S. entities to those unreliable trade and export lists.
It's a clear sign that the tension between these two economic powerhouses is just escalating.
Right.
It seems like they're both ready to dig in for a long trade battle.
And it wasn't just China that was concerned.
Right.
Singapore's prime minister, he was pretty critical too. He said, those actions, they're not what you do to a friend. He said it was a dangerous turning point. And he reaffirmed that they're committed to those multilateral trade frameworks.
Yeah, those comments reflect this bigger worry that a lot of countries have, right?
Right.
About these protectionist policies becoming more popular and how that could weaken the international trade systems that are already in place.
Absolutely. So to sum it all up, this 90-day tariff pause, it was a big deal.
Yeah.
It gave the markets a boost, especially for those countries that didn't retaliate against the U.S.
Right.
But at the same time, the pressure on China is way up with those higher tariffs.
For sure.
And why this policy shift happened, well, that's still up for debate. Some say it's a sign that they realized those initial tariffs were backfiring, hurting the economy.
Right.
Others say it was all part of a bigger plan, a way to get leverage in negotiations. And the truth is, we might not know for sure for a while.
Exactly. And it's super important to remember, even though we have this pause now, things are still really uncertain when it comes to U.S. trade policy in the long term.
Right.
Especially with China.
Right.
It feels more like things are getting worse, not better.
Totally. And this whole roller coaster ride, the tariffs going up and this pause, it really makes you think.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about numbers on a screen, right? This stuff has real consequences in the real world.
Absolutely.
These sudden changes, they can shake up the global financial markets.
Yeah.
They can mess with those delicate relationships between countries.
That's true.
And at the end of the day, they can even affect how much we pay for stuff at the store.
Right, those everyday costs.
So what does all this volatility tell us about the future of global trade? About how important tariffs are going to be in international relations? It's a complicated situation, and the long-term effects, well, they're definitely worth thinking about.
I think that's a great point to leave it on.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.